Thank you for joining us today. This is a webinar being presented by Firestorm, underwritten by the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. My name is Bill Baker, and I'd like to welcome you on this cold day that we have here in Tennessee. We're operating out of Atlanta, Georgia, so we've got some of that air that you've blown down to us. On the call today is Jill Royka, the Assistant Director of the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, and she'll have an opportunity to speak to us in a minute or two. We are following this with the Crisis Coach hashtag Crisis Coach. We invite you as visitors to become our friend on Firestorm Solutions or to follow us on Twitter. We're glad to have you with us there. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, and we empower you to manage your risks and crises. Firestorm has expertise in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Our attorneys make us do this disclaimer. Please keep in mind this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. The work product provided today must be read in conjunction with the guidance given by national, regional, local authorities, as well as your organization or your school's personal counsel. In addition, this information should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. The Tennessee Association of Independent Schools is underwriting this Crisis Coach webinar series, and today we're going to be discussing emergency preparedness and the introduction and overview, and about a month from now we'll be discussing additional things. The series is underwritten by the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. Jill, I'd like to turn it over to you for introductory comments.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody who is in attendance today, and we have enjoyed joining teams with Firestorm because they are experts and they're national leaders in crisis management, and we know this is extremely important for our schools because we want them to be as prepared as possible when it comes to any kind of crisis. So we appreciate Jim being able, he's the president and COO of Firestorm, that he is willing to present this series of webinars. And also he is, for those of you who are on the line, he is also going to have a workshop in each of the 3 regions of the state. So he will be in Memphis and Knoxville and Nashville, and all of those can be found on our website, TAISTN.com. And scroll down to our events and see where Firestorm is, and then you can find the details for those upcoming workshops that we're very excited about. So thank you.
Good. Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Jim Satterfield, the president of Firestorm. Jim has extensive experience. Let me say some good things about you, Jim.
We don't want to bore everybody at the very beginning, Bill.
Well, let us suffice to say you've got the credentials. If you have questions, you'll have to use the GoToMeeting question feature because all the participants today are on mute. But if you do enter your questions, we'll try to answer them at the end of this presentation. Jim, over to you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to work with the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, and I'd like to thank everybody that's on the call today for what you're doing for the children in your communities. Independent schools really make a significant difference in the lives of families and children, and that's really what we're all about here. Unfortunately, events happen that directly impact our schools, and we need to make sure that we're prepared to deal with them. And that's what this webinar series and the workshops will be about, and it's a continuing education opportunity. This session is being recorded, so if there are others in your school that you would like to have access to the information, there'll be a link both from the Firestorm site and from the association site, so I would encourage you to do that. Bill mentioned briefly the question function. It's on that little toolbar up to the right. If you've got a question, type it in there and we will address it. Toward the end of today, we'll also have a time then again for you to come in and do questions. Every time we do a webinar, we try to give you an update of what we're seeing going on. And unfortunately, events still seem to be occurring. with quite great frequency. Currently, there's obviously been shootings recently, the Colorado shooting at Littleton and the shooting in Roswell, New Mexico. Firestorm is working with the superintendents in both of those districts in dealing with the consequence management events that occur afterwards. It's interesting as you think about this that you can plan your team for the emergencies and crises that are developed, but it's the consequences that occur after that have the lasting impact on the school. As you look at this, the shooting in Littleton, for example, lasted 80 seconds. The consequences will go on for an extended period of dealing with it. We also just had the shootings in the movie theater in Florida. It's hard to believe that a text message or a bag of popcorn is worth someone's life. We're in a different world today than the world we all grew up in, and it's an exposure for us to see. There's been a charter school threat in San Diego with 5 different charter schools being directly threatened in that area. Communicable illness is a significant exposure where flu season is upon us and will continue. There have been several forecasts that communicable, from a pandemic standpoint, the swine flu will be back. But communicable illness is a growing threat, and it could be meningitis or whooping cough or chicken pox, any of those other things that can come in, and they have a significant impact on your schools. And so I would encourage you all to look at your own communicable illness planning. We've also had the Freedom Industries story, and you probably followed that. That was the company that released the chemical into the waters in West Virginia. And as a result of that, homes and schools had to be closed along with businesses and the impact there. So you can do everything right at your school, and your community could still be impacted and have an update. So we'll share with you each month what we're seeing and what we're hearing and what we're talking about at that point in time. Our whole conversation today is about simplifying preparedness. It's a complex issue. There's a lot of things that are occurring behind our children, and that's an area that we want to share more with you about as we go forward. At Firestorm, we follow a predict, plan, perform process, understanding the vulnerabilities and threats, what are their impacts, how do you monitor them, and what are their triggers. The plans and policies and procedures range from physical security to cybersecurity, social media risk, vulnerability analysis, the threat assessment works that you need to do, the emergency plans, the crisis management, the communications that you would need to place. The perform are the training and the exercises. And as we go through this webinar series over the next year, we'll be going through all of these plans and giving you an insight of things that you can start on as you work forward in this area. The training, the exercises, the supplies that you need to have to your school, the monitoring that you need to conduct, all of those come together. And then, unfortunately, having a crisis management plan in place will make a difference for you in terms of outcomes. So this webinar series is designed to take each of these areas and build further into them. And we're really going to be talking in a little while about the predict area as we go into that. So there are 5 common failures that we find in every disaster and crisis, and I'll bring all 5 of those up just to give you a quick overview. And as you think about your plans, and next time we're going to be going into more detail around the planning and what separates a good plan from a bad plan, you've got to think about who your critical suppliers are. That's the most common failure in a disaster or a crisis. We talked briefly just a minute ago about the Freedom Industries contaminating the water. If you don't have water, you're not going to be running your school. And so looking at who your critical suppliers are and do they have plans in place and how do they impact in your school. You've got to train your employees, your students, your teachers, your staff for what they need to do. Now, it's not just what, it's how they do those things that becomes very, very important as you go forward. By the way, that's a common mistake that we find in many plans is that they tell people what to do and not how to do. And at home, you need everyone to have a disaster plan at home because family trumps job. If your teachers and staff don't have a plan at home, then they're not going to be focused on the school and what needs to be done at that point in time. Third is failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. We see people looking at the obvious exposures. You're in Tennessee, you've got tornado exposures, you could have flooding, as we've seen in certain regions and times. You could have fire exposure. So those things are fairly common. But what about all the other areas that are emerging? Workplace violence, the social media risk. By the way, social media risk is the fastest growing risk that businesses and schools face today. And across the board, we find that most organizations don't have monitoring plans in place to let them know that the threat is imminent. Fourth is the failure to conduct exercises and update your plans. If you don't test your plans, you don't know that they're going to work. And if you don't keep them current, you won't have the right information when you need to do that. And lastly, develop a crisis communications plan. That failure, most companies in schools don't have their messaging already identified for each one of the vulnerabilities and threats. They haven't followed through in a message mapping approach to say what are their 3 key messages to each of the stakeholder groups in a disaster or a crisis. So as you think about those will be issues that we're going to be addressing in this webinar series as we go forward. So the question that is in front of all of us is, are our students safe? What's the potential for the school to suffer damage and to have a problem associated with it? Now, when we listed the threats and the common failures on the earlier slide, there was one that said failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. So let's start in dealing with that question as we think about what's out there. So how do we do that? We start by doing a vulnerability analysis, looking at the impact versus the certainty that an event would occur. As you think about that, then we can develop a risk analysis, and we'll show you some of the tools around that as we go forward in the webinar today, because that's the beginning foundation of designing your plans. Next would come a framework and then the individual details associated with it. So as we think about doing a vulnerability analysis, here are the types of things that I would want you to do in your school. First, a site assessment, a security review. Look at the geography, the location, the topography, the access controls that you have to your buildings. And we'll talk about some more details on that site assessment on the next slide. We also need to do interviews with your headmaster, your chief business officer, the faculty, the staff, anyone that's involved. I would also encourage coordination with the local police and fire. And then a document review, a review of the plans that you see there and the policies and procedures as we go forward. So that's how we get into doing the vulnerability analysis, so that making sure that your plans align appropriately in that process. Bill, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback, I think, through the phone. I don't know if you're hearing it or not. If you are, let's see if we can do something about that.
I hear a little bit of a crackle in your voice. I'm not sure if it's my phone or if it is the system. So just wanted to get a little feedback.
Thanks, Jill, for pointing it out. Guys, welcome to live broadcast. So we get some feedback coming in, and we appreciate that patience. So I think the situation's under control. So let's continue to move forward. So
okay.
when you do this site assessment and the vulnerability analysis, and I would recommend that you do it. You could get a security professional in your area, the local law enforcement, to come and help you do that. Firestorm certainly does this with schools on a regular basis. But you want to look at the access control. That's the most critical element as we look at those aspects of your school, the physical security, the building structures, the geography, the topography. How long does it take a first responder to get there? Because we'll talk in another webinar about the value of time in this, and what is the monitoring and surveillance equipment that you have in place, the cameras and the other areas. So as we do this, this is really when we look at the site assessment portion of it. The interviews are really looking at these types of policies and procedures, your hiring, your discipline, your termination, your visitor policies and procedures. We want to know who is on your campus at any given time. What are your emergency protocols? Lockdown, lockout, evacuation. The notifications and communication modalities. Can you page and be broadcast across your entire campus? Are there areas where cell phones don't work? Doing those things and understanding we talked earlier about the message mapping, writing the messages before they're needed because it's easier to edit than it is to create. Training of your people, training on the warning signs, what to look for, doing the monitoring of social media, and then doing the reporting so that people can come forward and share with you. And anonymous reporting is certainly something that we would strongly encourage you to do. And then what are your threat assessment protocols as we're going forward? So now we've gotten into the site assessment. We've really gotten into looking at some of your documents and plans and procedures. So when we start to do this and we think about threats, are all the threats that you have equal, and should we have different ways? I think our focus has been on active shooter in schools because that's certainly one of the parents' greatest nightmare. No one wants to pick up that phone and have to make a phone call to a parent and say that their son or daughter won't be coming through. But there are other threats as we would go forward. So one of the things that we talk about doing is creating a hazard impact matrix, looking at all of the events that could possibly occur and then viewing them from a probability, onset, forewarning, duration, intensity, looking at the human impact, the property impact, the business impact, coming up with the total so you get a relative criticality. Now, this particular chart hasn't been filled out. No one is going to have a zero risk factor. You all are. But this would give you an idea of where you might want to start placing your emphasis as you go through and look at the exposures that are happening in your school. And we'll share a more comprehensive list in just a few minutes. As you go through it, certainly those that rank high want to make sure that you address. Even if a risk ranks low, that still doesn't mean you don't have to have plans because those type of events will in fact occur. So as we think about the country and we think about Tennessee and we think about your city and then we think about your neighborhood and then we think about your individual school, we look at those and we create zones of risk. And so as we go through and think about those 4 zones, the first zone that comes up is the national zone. And in a national zone, we're looking at something that would impact the entire country. A pandemic is an example of that. And by the way, we generally encourage you to think about a communicable illness plan instead of a pandemic because many people are afraid that a pandemic would never occur or they don't think about that. Communicable illness seems to be much more likely. So as we move from that, we then move to the second zone. The second zone as we go into it is your region. That could be your town, your county. What could happen in your county that would have an impact on your school? We talked earlier about the West Virginia contaminated water is a good example of that. But it could be terrorism, it could be floods, it could be an explosion that would come in. Now in moving in closer, we look at your individual neighborhood. Where is the school located? And clearly a 3-mile radius around your school. What could occur within that? Have you driven that area so that you know the businesses that are there, the types of things that they're storing, railroad tracks and highways, and where these types of incidents can come in, chemical spills, biological threats, and gas leaks. And by the way, on these 4 levels of risk in the 4 zones, they apply your school at your home. So you would want to think about them on that same level. And then lastly, as we move out of thinking about a neighborhood, we look at the last zone. And the last zone is your specific address, where your school is located. Look at what could happen within your building. Look at the school, stand in front of it. What's located immediately to the right, to the left, behind, and across the street. Those are areas that could have a direct, immediate impact upon your school. So when we think about these zones of risk in coming together, a fire could certainly impact the building. Violence could certainly impact. So as you start to do it, it's another way to help you organize thinking about the risk that you're facing within your school. Now here's a list of school hazards and threats that occur on a regular basis. I would encourage your team within your school to create your own list. What else could occur? You'll see natural disasters because obviously that's going to vary from one region to another. Everything that you see there has occurred within schools here in the United States, and in fact, one that's not up there was we responded to a university with a cannibalism problem. So it's hard to believe that in the United States of America that those would work and occur. One of the things that as you think about this, then you take a look at these risks, you've got the hazard matrix, and the next thing you want to start to do is to map it. You want to then say, what are those things that have that high impact and high certainty, that upper right-hand corner where it's red? That's a very high exposure area. The next then coming down to those that are high, that's the orange color, the yellow more to medium, and the green that are low. We're not going to spend a great deal of time working on those things in that rare, insignificant quadrant in the bottom left-hand corner. Those are going to be things that are not going to take a great deal of our time. And a black swan is an event that's not yet occurred. It's outside of these areas. And so our plans have to be designed to be able to respond to that. So if we look at this a little bit further and to go into more depth, we can focus on the impact and certainty. And as we've seen on the previous chart, as we look at the terms and as they're defined, they go from on impact from insignificant all the way to catastrophic, and from certainty all the way from rare to highly probable. If you get the combination of catastrophic and highly probable, that upper right-hand quadrant, that's going to be an area where we certainly want to spend time. So as you're sitting and working on the risk and the threats that you've identified, you take a grid approach and map them, and that will help you prioritize the training, the exercises, and the documentation for your team to know what to do and how to do it. Now, I expanded that list that you saw earlier about the hazards, and you're now starting to see them put into a natural list on the left and human-induced on the right. So you take these risks, go back to that matrix to give the weighting, and then the map to map where they're going to fall as you do your vulnerability and threat assessment as you're going forward. So what we're trying to do is to empower you to be able to look at the types of problems and exposures faced in your school. And it will vary from one school to another. So these definitions of those colors that I gave you earlier in normal operations aren't the ones that we're as concerned about down in green. But those that are the black swans, the very high risk, the high risk areas, are ones that will directly impact your school that we need to come together. And for some reason my screen went blank, but now it's coming back. So let me see if I have everything I need. Looks like I'm all plugged in, so it shouldn't be a problem at this point. So let's start with violence. That's a particular risk that I think is in the mind of every parent and goes back to the question that we started about earlier, and that's, are we safe? Here's the statistics that we see in the market. There's 7 deaths annually for every 10 million children. And that percentage probability is extremely low, but it's the one that preoccupies every parent as they think about it. But no one wants, again, to be in that position where they have to call a parent and say that these things have occurred. Now, in 2010, that's the most recent date that we have the statistics from the Department of Labor, there were 518 individuals killed due to workplace violence. Now, the statistics around workplace violence in the United States are that there are over 2 million episodes annually. And I'll share that with you on another slide as we come back in going forward. Of these 518 individuals killed, 77 were multiple homicides. That's where 2 or more were killed. Now, I know we don't like to think about our school as a workplace, but in fact it is. And we're seeing an increasing frequency and severity over the years in these individual areas. Look at what's happened with school shootings through the decades listed. Look at last year, and you'll see an uptick in coming in the last 2 or 3 years to increase that frequency level. and it continues to expand as we go forward. How could we be safer? There's that 2 million episodes of workplace violence. That's a number that comes from OSHA. By the way, from the National School Safety Center, they say that there are 2 million bullies and 2.7 million victims in American schools. So having an anti-bullying program in your school with an awareness becomes really critical as we're associated with it. I also find the linkage between the 2 million bullies and the 2 million episodes of reported workplace violence. And by the way, the statistics are that some 30% of the workplace violence events are never reported as you go forward. So we really think the key is to start in that to the right that you see where it's behaviors of concern, training your people of what to look for so that you become aware that there's behaviors of concern as it escalates to threatening behavior, physical injury, and ultimately death. We want to intervene as early as we can in that particular area. Now, Firestorm was founded in 2005, and we have an expert council. These are nationally recognized experts that work with us in their fields. A retired Surgeon General, former Director of the Centers for Disease Control, military generals, supply chain experts, food safety, product recall. But the very first expert council member we had at Firestorm was Dr. C. Everett Koop, the retired U.S. Surgeon General who passed away last year. We were very sorry to see Dr. Koop go, and we all are familiar with the work he did on smoking and other threats. But he saw a direct link between bullying in schools and violence in the workplace. When he was a child, he was small and in poor health and was picked on by other children at school, and so they nicknamed him Chicken Coop. And so he got the nickname Chick Coop as a result of that. And so I can remember lots of phone calls with Dr. Coop as we were working with organizations, and he'd go, Chick Coop here, when he would come on the call. And I had a hard time thinking about calling him that way. But it was an event that impacted him for the rest of his life. And I would say that as we think about our schools and we could be safer, think about this bullying issue as an early indicator that we want to be aware of and respond. Now we've talked about the escalation from behaviors of concern ultimately to death. Let's look at what the profile of workplace shooters are. And you'll see here it's overwhelmingly male. Median age is in the 30s, 98% by a single attacker, and twice as many attacks are committed by current employees than former employees. We responded to a school for a termination that was not handled well, where the teacher went home and got a rifle and came back and killed the head of school and committed suicide. So you think about these are the incidents that we're seeing as they come forward. Now when we think about schools, there were a couple of these that become very staggering to me as we think about this aspect. Notice that 75% of them felt bullied. That's an interesting statistic to see in tying it together. 75% had a history of suicidal thoughts or actions. We worked with a school last year where it was uncovered that a student was threatening suicide. There's a concept called leakage. That last time, look at the last line on that list, 66% of the time, leakage of 2 or more people. What that means is that if there's an event, on average within your schools, 2 other people knew of the threat prior to it coming out. They told someone, they saw something, they observed it, and that's one of the reasons we'll be talking with you in the coming sessions about anonymous reporting. That's an important element of becoming aware of knowing what's there. But this is a situation that you need to be aware of. This is the threat that's here. And some other ones that were startling here. 40% were doing well in school. 2/3 had never been in trouble. So as we're thinking about it, there's not a pure stereotype that we could certainly draw. So we've talked about schools, and we've talked about violence and shooters as we go through. Let's circle back to that vulnerability threat assessment and think about it. So when we think about the impact and severity the impact severity and the certainty that it's going to occur, where do we see shooters rank in these areas? Clearly, if it occurred, it would be very catastrophic. But it's not highly probable. It's in a lower probability, but it's not a zero probability. And it's rare when we think about all of the schools out there. We're seeing it. We're more aware of it. It's certainly in the news as we go forward, but it's a different type of an environment for us to be in. So I want you to think about it as you start to map the risk in creating your own area. Where would you put it and where would you place it? It's going to be on that top bar, so it doesn't matter whether it's in the one immediately to the left or all the way to the right. It's an area that you'll want to address because of the requirement that's coming in. So we've talked a lot about a vulnerability risk assessment. We've talked about the various steps that you would take, and we put it in perspective with violence and the active shooters that we're concerned about in our schools. So what is a crisis? A crisis is an event that comes about that's not been fully examined, that there isn't a plan for, and therefore you can't control or mitigate the result. A crisis is not business as usual. It's business as unusual. It's going to be different. In working with a superintendent in one of the schools where there was a shooting, he made the following statement to us. You know, over the last 10 years, I've trained our staff and worked directly with them to respond to a crisis and to respond to the emergency. And we did well at responding to the crisis and emergency. But we never did any training about dealing with the consequences that ultimately came from there. And the consequence management, the impacts of what do you say and who do you say it to, and how do you deal with the impacts around it, reunifying students with parents. You're going to send an announcement out that there's been an event at the school and don't come. The parents, when they get that announcement, will say, wait a minute, I'm going to the school to check on my child. So if you don't think through these things and plan them out in advance, you're going to end up with a crisis in dealing with the consequences of whatever's occurred. And those are part of the things that we want you to become more and more aware as we go through and talk about these and going forward. I normally tell everybody that the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 years old, and it was my birthday. And at work and at school, if it's a surprise, it's generally not good. And that's the reason why we're focused on preparedness. We're focused on making sure that the plans tell people how to do things, not just what to do, and that you think through all of these areas before you're forced to make those decisions based upon wrong or incorrect information, because in a crisis, that's what occurs. We want to talk a little bit today about a case study. I mentioned that Firestorm regularly manages crises and consequence management thereafter, and most of the major events that you're aware of, Firestorm leadership has been a part of it. We're working currently with Littleton and Roswell. We did the crisis management at Virginia Tech after the shootings there a number of years ago, responded to the university with cannibalism, and working with smaller events and major events. And the plans and work that we do are based upon the actual experience that we had. What I'd like to do is take you a little bit inside of the Virginia Tech experience. And it was the definitive example of workplace violence in the United States. More people died in that shooting than any other. The Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut was certainly horrific. The age of the children was made it doubly so, and clearly there were heroes and teachers that helped in that area, but there were more deaths at Virginia Tech than any other. So as you go through it, if you've never seen the Virginia Tech campus, it's absolutely beautiful in the rolling hills of Virginia. It looks very Ivy League with the buildings and the trees as they're together. But on April the 16th, a few years ago, it morphed from the picture that you currently see to this picture. 140 satellite trucks, 324 media outlets, 1,500 reporters descended upon the campus, and it was the major story. We remember seeing those things on our televisions, and I'm sure you followed it closely. So in working in this, the shootings occurred on Monday, and Virginia Tech reached out to Firestorm on Wednesday to help them with the crisis management and consequence management as we came through. Working to develop a crisis communications plan is extremely important. By the way, in that fading picture that came in and out, that was the gray hair back over to the right, coming down the steps of the hall. Oh, there it is again. I don't know why it seems to be fading now. So what we look at in these types of areas, you had a physically intact campus, but again, highly traumatized community. You had the media in the classrooms, in the administration buildings, in the dorm rooms. When we arrived, we told our people to leave their business cards at home. We were just Jim, Phil, Brenda there to help as we were going through it. Had to establish command and control of the campus to get the media out of those buildings and aligned with where they needed to be. And I'll show you us here. In fact, I'll go to the sign now and show you. This was a sign that we worked with Virginia Tech to put up on the doors of the building. And what it did, as simple as it is, it empowered the students to be able to go to the media and say, you're not supposed to be here. So it was not the president, Dr. Charles Steger, communicating that. It was the individual students. We had a reporter who dressed as a Catholic priest who attempted to go into the hospital to interview the students who'd been shot. We had another reporter who went up to a family doing the memorial service for their child and tried to conduct an interview. No one can be prepared for that level of onslaught as it comes together. So we helped them prepare their messages, and you might want to jot down the 3 messages from Virginia Tech. This is something for you to take and begin to work on within your school. The 3 messages from Virginia Tech were, we'll not be defined by this event, we will invent the future, and we will embrace the families. If there's an event that's occurred, like this particular one, the police will be doing investigations. Let the police and the authorities talk about what happened and how it occurred and the investigation that's ongoing. You as the head of school and within your school shouldn't be talking about it. But whatever bad happened, it's not what your school is. That's where the will not be defined by this event would come in. The second is, what are you going to put in place to see that it doesn't happen again? That's the invent the future that we were just talking about. And lastly, your heart goes out to the families that were involved, and the students and the community that were here. Those are the key elements that you want to think about. We would call those home bases. So if you're crafting messages, will not be defined by the event, will invent the future, and will embrace the families, can become the cornerstone of building the message maps for you to deal in each of those individual areas. Now, when we have an event like this, one of the things that we do is to look at what are the metrics. How do you know if you did a good job or not? How do you know if these things accomplished what you wanted to accomplish? When we arrived at Virginia Tech, we identified that there were 12,838 offer letters out to high school seniors. So moms and dads were sitting around kitchen tables talking with sons and daughters. Will you be safe? Is there racial tension here? Should you go to somewhere else? By targeting their messages to the high school seniors, to target our messages to the parents and getting the alumni involved, we were able to manage that 2-week period. The shootings occurred on April the 16th. The deadline for decision, if you're going to come and be a part of Virginia Tech next fall in the freshman class, was May 1. So in that 2-week period, the future of Virginia Tech hung in the balance. The normal conversion rate of offers of acceptance is 30%. Normally 30% of the students who receive a letter from Virginia Tech agree and want to become a Hokie. We were able to get that to 60%. We doubled the historical conversion rate in the face of the worst episode of workplace violence in United States history. So having a plan, executing on the plan, understanding what the consequences are, become so very, very critical. That's the reason why we're talking today about the plans in your school, the vulnerability and threat assessment that you're going to be doing, making sure things align and come together. So as we think about the plans in your school, let me give you a framework for you to consider. And as we think about preparedness, we follow that predict, plan, perform that we talked about earlier. And under the predict, you do the benchmark gap analysis. That means you're looking at where your plans are relative to standards and best practices. Do your threat assessment. Do your vulnerability assessment. The vulnerability analysis is around the school and the risk and the threats. Threat assessments are around the threat associated with a particular individual at a point in time. The types of plans you see listed there, these are all areas that you want to have as part of your plans and having them go through, and we'll be talking about these in the webinar series sponsored by the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools. And then perform, you've got to have access to your plans. You've got to have monitoring and triggers and testing. And we'll do a whole session on nothing but testing of plans. And the key around that is not all of your tests and exercises need to be scheduled. Some of them need to be unannounced as you would start to carry them forward. All of those come together to plug in and create a school preparedness framework. That's what I would like you to think about in the coming session as we go forward in each of these areas. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, and we've got a few more topics to talk about before we wrap up today. But, Bill, I'd like you to look and see if anybody has a question at this point before we go on, and if so, we'll try to address it at this point, and we'll give one more chance a little bit later. So if you do have a question, if you'll use that toolbar on the upper right-hand side of the page, you can type a question in, and Bill will read it to us, and we will give you an answer. Bill, I'm not seeing a question at this point. Is that the same on your computer? Bill, I hear you on mute. I don't hear you in...
That's right. I had to get off of mute. No, we don't have questions yet. Please, if you have some questions, type them in so that we can take advantage of this time.
Right, well, let's continue the process on a little bit more as we talk about this area. One of the things that we have made a relationship with the association and working with Rich and Jill, and that is that Firestorm has a preparedness self-assessment. And on the screen it says business continuity, but it's a preparedness self-assessment for your school. And that preparedness assessment looks at 8 different dimensions that are required to have a preparedness program within your school. And we look at each of those 8 dimensions at approximately 5 data points. And in a 1-hour interview with you, we'll get your answers to those questions and then be able to generate a findings report to tell you exactly where you are relative to standards and best practices, and benchmark you against the hundreds of other schools that have gone forward. This is a great beginning process for you to understand where your school is and what you need to do. The assessment...
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so this assessment, it's valued at $2,500, and it just takes 1 hour of somebody's time at the school? And
That's correct.
If that's true, who would they need to speak to? What person at their school would be the one that you go through this conversation with?
Well, we've dealt with a variety of different titles within schools, and sometimes it's the head of school, sometimes it's an operations person or a person who's been charged with the safety and security planning within the school. The business officer of the school would be an appropriate title, and you can have more than one person on the conference call. We'll schedule the time in advance, and by the way, because of the relationship with the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools, they've underwritten the cost of this, so there is no cost to a member of TAIS to have this assessment done. After the assessment is done in that interview, approximately 1 week later, we'll schedule a call to give an oral report based upon the findings that we learned in the assessment. And then after that phone call, we'll then send the formal document so you have it for your use and review and planning and next steps. After you've had a chance to read the report, we'll be glad to do a follow-up call to answer any further questions.
Okay.
All included.
And many schools are very aware of how vulnerable they are, and so I know we have 3 more webinars scheduled for this semester, one each month, February 12th, March 19th, April 16th. And in those 3 different webinars, will you approach, one of them is vulnerability analysis, and then one is next week plan, one is time when it matters most. Will you get into more of what schools should do, how to, not just informing them about statistics, but will they learn more about what they should be doing, how they should be doing it?
Exactly. And in fact, we incorporated in today's webinar around conducting a vulnerability analysis. So I think what we may do is move up the schedule just a little to really go to the heart of the question that you raised, Jill. We'll get into the planning and how you go about it and what you need to do associated with those individual areas. So it is also the type of webinar that going back and listening to it later after you've had a chance, because we gave a lot of information today.
True, and you need to look back and, yes.
And so while I see we've got one question, and Bill, I don't know what that is, but
yeah, we got 2 questions right now, Jim.
All right, why don't we deal with those, and then we'll continue on. Bill,
okay.
What's the first?
It says, aren't most of the events related to mental health?
No, they're not. Now, a lot of the violence-related issues are related to mental health, and so the person who wrote that's very smart and did that indication associated with it. But and that's where monitoring behavior, looking at what is the training that we need to give to our teachers, to our faculty, to our staff, and to other students to be able to identify someone that's at risk. Are they at risk at home, of violence in the home, sexual abuse? Are they subjected to bullying? What are the triggers that could be causing it? Is it depression? Is it substance abuse? How do those areas come in? What do we look for and carry back? And in that light, many of these things are mental and related to it. But we are also dealing with natural disasters, fires, earthquakes. The Memphis area sits right on a major fault line, and it has a higher exposure than California to earthquakes, just hasn't had one recently that has been of a significant issue. So as we look at those, there's a blending of physical exposures and man-made and other things that can happen in your area. It could be a chemical spill. Nashville had flooding not long ago that caused a particular problem. So we look at all of these areas, and that's why this isn't a safety analysis, a safety self-assessment. It's a preparedness self-assessment to be able to deal with it. Bill, what's the second question?
There's a person that's inquiring about, are there costs to retain Firestorm after the self-assessment and expert analysis if additional services are necessary?
Well, if you hire Firestorm, then we are horrible people. We would like to be paid for the work we do. Now, just like anyone else, we'll work with a school because the financial aspects of this should not be a limitation to the preparedness within the school. And there are a variety of ways that schools work with us, sometimes on a fixed price where we know what a plan or a project would cost, or the other is a monthly program. But we're not focused on that in this webinar today, and we're not focused on it in this assessment. This assessment is to empower the school to know where they are relative to standards and best practices, and then benchmark against other schools, because that will start you down a process. And if you follow the webinar series, we'll give you the tools there to begin doing these things and working together. We do have a crisis coach program where we work with schools jointly, where you select the priorities and the projects, and we'll do that, and we'll find a way to make it fit within your school budget. We're dealing with schools across the country, from the extremely small to the very large. So we'll find a way to make that work in each and every area.
I want to let the schools know that you all will give us some information about pricing and the different levels of when Firestorm is needed and what that would entail. But they can always contact you at any time. But your workshops coming up, there's one next month in Memphis, in March. There's one in Knoxville. In March. There's one in Nashville. And these workshops are in person with Jim Setterfield, and it's helping your school survive a crisis. And he will go into more detail.
And what we'll do in those is we're actually going to do some test exercises where you'll get to experience making decisions in a crisis as we carry forward and do that. And again, there's no charge to your members for that particular area. So we're a team. We're all in this together. We all have exactly the same goals. And we'll make an attempt today to reach out to all the schools that are on today's webinar and in the coming weeks to see if they want the assessment or if they have other questions they didn't want to ask in an open forum. We really find that many times schools don't want to put everything out on the table in an open call. They'd rather deal with that one-on-one, and so we're going to make every effort to do that. Gertie Knox, who's one of our Firestorm principals, is going to be making some of those follow-up opportunities, so I've asked her to take the time out to do that in the coming week to answer other questions. One other thing everyone needs to be aware of, the relationship that we have with the Tennessee Association of Independent Schools is that if you find yourself in a crisis, that initial first hour of consultation is being done at no charge. We did this with the Georgia Association of Independent Schools, and even before we had the webinar series, they had a school that had a problem. And we were able to get on the phone and in that first hour tell them what was going to happen next and help them make some decisions. And as it turned out, we were able to get it de-escalated and solved within that period of time. They were very fortunate in that particular event, and those things would work out. So your association, as it's always been, is one of your key assets. And I would encourage your school to continue to follow out and reach out. But the school called the association. They contacted us. We called the head of school, stepped them through, and fortunately we encouraged them not to hold a press conference and not to talk about some things, and they were able to keep their school out. Parents form opinions quickly, and you do not want to get labeled with some of the problems here because it will affect the brand and the reputation of your school as you carry forward, and we look forward to working with you in that area. So, Jill, thanks for interjecting and responding on this. I think we should.
Thank you. This is wonderful. This is a wonderful first start. And then I know we have 3 more in the series, 1 each month, and then the workshops in each of the regions of the state. And we are so happy to be working with you because crisis is such an important issue, and it's a scary issue for every school for obvious reasons. And so we're happy to be partnered with you in helping our schools across Tennessee.
And please don't hesitate. If you're on the call today and you want to see this video, this presentation again, there'll be a link that you can go and view the recording again at no charge. And we'll be able to work with you as you continue to go back forward. And Gertie will be our point person as we work through those individual areas.
And I will send that link out to our heads of schools where they can hear this recorded webinar today, but then also to give contact information to you for any individual questions or concerns that schools have.
Right. And by the way, one of the things that we all should look at and share together, we're all in this together. So cooperatively, the members of the association need to team with other schools in their area so that you could be backups for each other if something had happened at your campus, that at least there would be another campus close by that those could be worked together. So we'll work on these elements as we continue to move forward. And if there are schools in your area that aren't members of the association, I would encourage you to have them join because I think united we have a significant advantage that we can come together. I think, Jill, in honor of some of the questions that you talked about, we'll jump specifically into the planning side more in the next webinar and give some details. Today, we really told everybody to think about identifying the threats, the risks, the hazards to their school, and then trying to rank those and then to plot them in that vulnerability analysis. We should think about the frequency and severity. Unfortunately, the active shooter is the highest profile area, and it's the most rare. but it's certainly one
Yeah.
that we can't afford not to plan for, and we want to be able to do it.
Exactly. And I agree with you that a lot of the information was covered today, and being able to reflect back on this webinar and your screens will be very helpful.
So
Please
please
look back and look at it again.
And if you've got a question, Gertie will try to reach out to each of you today. Well, she'll be trying to reach out to you. No way she can call everyone in one day, but she'll be reaching out and doing that coordination. And Gertie will be with us in Memphis and in the other locations as we do this across the state. So you'll have a chance to put faces with voices as we've talked about, and as we work through these areas, or reach directly out to Jill as she indicated. She'll be persistent and make sure that we help you as you need help in coming together. So,
and I'll email everybody after today's webinar. I'll email everybody who was on the call today, and so they have an email with direct contact to me and to you, Jim.
That's great. We appreciate that, and thank you so much for coordinating all
Thank you,
these.
Jim. This is wonderful. Our schools need this crisis management help because it is such an important issue.
Well, our prayer for everyone on the call today is that you don't have to call us with an event in your campus. We want to do this work. We want to make sure that you're prepared. We want to make sure that everything is in place, and you don't have to do that. And the way to do that is have these plans in place. We can mitigate the impacts by the level of preparedness that you have. Unfortunately, Firestorm doesn't sell a button that you can push and stop the tornado, but the schools in Joplin saw the direct impact from the tornadoes. The shooter in Littleton was there, but there were signs to look for and think about in these types of areas that you want to try to mitigate or identify them before actions occur. And we'll be talking a lot about that in the coming webinars. You can go to firestorm.com for more information. You can drop us an email at webinars@firestorm.com and then check directly with Jill as we come together. So, Jill, I think we've spent an hour together today. And
Thank you so much, Jim. This is wonderful.
Conversations and all the great input. Look, if anybody's got a question, give us a call. In the meantime, thank you for all that you do. Stay warm. It's cold down here in Georgia today, 16. I can imagine Tennessee is probably in the same area or colder. But
yes.
Spring will be back here shortly.
Jim, thank you so much. We look forward to working with you more on these webinars and upcoming workshops.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye-bye.